A billionaire mocked a poor mother counting coins at a diner. His son watched everything in silence. But what the boy did next made his father fall to his knees in tears. Marcus Wellington stepped out of his sleek private car with the confidence of a man who had never heard the word no in his entire adult life. At the peak of his career, he had built Wellington Technologies into a global empire worth billions, and every step he took seemed to remind the world of that fact. His shoes alone cost more than what most families earned in several months, and he wore his success like armor against everything he considered beneath him. His son Oliver walked beside him, a quiet boy whose eyes held a depth that most adults failed to notice. Oliver rarely spoke unless spoken to, but he observed everything. Every gesture, every expression, every word that escaped his father's lips was catalogued somewhere in that young mind, forming opinions that Marcus never bothered to ask about. "I still don't understand why we're eating here," Marcus muttered as they approached the entrance of the Golden Fork Diner, a modest establishment on the corner of a street he would normally never visit. "There are restaurants where presidents and kings wait for reservations, and you wanted to come to this place." Oliver looked up at his father with those observant eyes. "Mom used to bring me here. Before." The word "before" hung in the air like a ghost. Before the divorce. Before Marcus had won full custody through an army of lawyers. Before Oliver's mother had been reduced to supervised visits twice a month. Marcus shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The boy rarely asked for anything, and when he did, even Marcus found it difficult to refuse. The diner was exactly what Marcus had expected, which meant it was everything he despised. Fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly overhead, booths with vinyl seats that had seen better decades, the smell of fried food mixing with coffee that had been sitting too long. A few scattered patrons looked up as they entered, their eyes widening at the obvious wealth that had just walked through the door. "Table for two," Marcus announced to the hostess, a young woman whose name tag read Bethany. He didn't bother with pleasantries. People like her were invisible to him, merely obstacles between himself and whatever he wanted at any given moment. Bethany led them to a booth near the window. As Marcus slid into his seat, his eyes swept across the diner with thinly veiled contempt. This was the world his ex-wife had come from, the world she had tried to show Oliver before Marcus had put a stop to it. He would not allow his son to develop an appreciation for mediocrity. "Order whatever you want," Marcus said, pushing the laminated menu toward Oliver without looking at it himself. "Though I can't imagine anything here is worth eating." Oliver studied the menu carefully, his small fingers tracing over the options. "Can I get the cheeseburger with fries and a milkshake?" If that's what passes for food here, then yes. A waitress appeared, an older woman with tired eyes but a warm smile. Her name tag read Dorothy. She took their order with a patience that suggested she had served difficult customers before and had learned not to take anything personally. As they waited for their food, Marcus pulled out his phone, already bored with the experience. He had emails to answer, deals to monitor, a world to run, but Oliver wasn't looking at his father. His attention had been captured by something across the diner. A woman had just entered with a young girl, who appeared to be around Oliver's age. The woman's clothes were clean, but visibly worn. Her shoes practical, but far from new. She held herself with a dignity that seemed to require enormous effort, as if she were carrying weights that no one else could see. The little girl beside her clutched a small stuffed rabbit that had been loved almost to pieces. They sat in the booth directly across from Marcus and Oliver. The woman pulled out a small coin purse and began counting what was inside, her lips moving silently as she calculated. Quarters, dimes, nickels, a few pennies. The girl watched her mother with eyes that understood far more than any child should have to understand. "Mommy," the girl whispered, though in the quiet diner, her voice carried further than intended. "Can I have a burger too? Like that boy?" She was looking at Oliver's plate, which had just arrived, piled high with a steaming cheeseburger, golden fries, and a chocolate milkshake thick enough to stand a spoon in. The woman's face crumbled for just a moment before she rebuilt it into something resembling composure. "Baby, we talked about this. We're just getting something small today, remember? Water is fine. Water is good for you. But I'm hungry, Mommy." Those 3 words seemed to pierce something in the woman's chest. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they glistened with tears. She was fighting desperately to contain. I know, sweetheart, I know. Just let Mommy figure this out, okay? Marcus had been watching this exchange with growing irritation. The scene was uncomfortable, and he despised being made uncomfortable. He preferred his world neat, contained, filled only with people who had solved their problems, or at least had the decency to hide them from view. "This is exactly why I didn't want to come here," he muttered to Oliver, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "You can't escape this kind of thing in places like this. People who can't manage their own lives, dragging everyone else into their misery." Oliver's head snapped toward his father, his eyes widening. "It's simple economics," Marcus continued, warming to his subject in the way he did during board meetings. "If you work hard, you succeed. If you don't, you end up counting coins in a diner while your child goes hungry. Personal responsibility. That woman probably made 100 bad decisions to end up where she is." The woman had heard every word. Her hands, which had been organizing the coins, went completely still. A flush of humiliation crept up her neck, and she seemed to shrink in her seat, trying to become invisible. But then something remarkable happened. The little girl stood up from her booth, her worn shoes making soft sounds on the diner floor as she walked directly toward Marcus Wellington. She stood before him, this titan of industry, this billionaire who had made grown men tremble in negotiations, and she looked at him with eyes that held no fear whatsoever. "My mommy works very hard," the girl said, her voice clear and steady despite a slight trembling in her lower lip. "She works so hard that sometimes she doesn't sleep. She gave me her dinner last night so I could eat. She's not lazy. She's the bravest person I know." The diner had gone completely silent. Every patron, every staff member, everyone was watching this small girl defending her mother's honor against a man who could buy the entire building without checking his bank balance. Marcus blinked, caught off guard for perhaps the first time in years. I wasn't talking about—" "You were talking about my mommy," the girl interrupted, and there were tears in her eyes now, but also a fierce dignity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I heard you, and you're wrong. You're wrong about everything." "Emma," the woman said, rushing over to collect her daughter, her voice thick with mortification. "I'm so sorry, sir. She doesn't know what she's saying. Please forgive her. Emma, come back to the table right now." "No, Mommy," Emma said, even as her mother's arms wrapped around her. "He was being mean to you. That's not fair. It's not fair." The woman, Sarah, as she would later be known to everyone in this story, lifted her daughter and held her close, shooting Marcus a look that contained multitudes. Shame, anger, exhaustion, but above all a mother's fierce protection of her child's spirit. "I apologize for the disturbance," Sarah said quietly, though she had nothing to apologize for. "We'll leave." She began gathering her things, the coins she had been counting scattered across the table, some falling to the floor. She didn't bother to pick them up. Her only focus was getting her daughter out of this situation with whatever dignity remained. But as she turned to leave, a voice stopped her. Wait! It wasn't Marcus who had spoken. It was Oliver. The boy had stood up from his booth, his untouched milkshake and half-eaten burger forgotten. He walked to where the coins had fallen and began picking them up one by one, placing them carefully on the table. "Please don't go," Oliver said, looking up at Sarah with eyes that held none of his father's contempt. "My dad was wrong. He's wrong about a lot of things, but he was really wrong about this." "Oliver," Marcus warned, his voice carrying an edge that usually made executives twice his son's age back down immediately. "Sit down, now." Oliver didn't sit down. Instead, he turned to face his father, and in that moment, something shifted in the diner. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. "No, Dad," Oliver said, and his voice was quiet, but unwavering. "I won't sit down, because you always told me that a man stands up for what's right. You told me that character is what you do when no one is watching. But everyone is watching right now, Dad. Everyone is watching, and what you did wasn't right." Marcus felt as if he had been slapped, his own words, his own lessons, thrown back at him by his own son. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "You don't know her story," Oliver continued, his small form seeming to grow larger with each word. "You don't know why she's counting those coins. You don't know what happened to her, what she's been through, what she's fighting for. You just saw her and decided she was less than you. But she's not less than anyone, Dad. She's a mum. She's trying, and her daughter loves her so much that she stood up to a stranger to defend her. When was the last time anyone defended you like that? When was the last time anyone loved you like that? The question hung in the air, unanswerable and devastating. Marcus Wellington, the man who had everything, suddenly realized that his own son had just revealed the one thing he didn't have: his son's respect. Dorothy, the waitress, had been watching the entire scene unfold. She stepped forward now, her voice gentle but firm. "Sir, I think maybe everyone needs a moment. Can I get anyone some water? Some coffee?" The tension broke slightly, but the damage had been done. Marcus sat frozen in his booth, his carefully constructed worldview cracking around him like ice in the spring. Sarah stood holding Emma, tears now streaming freely down both their faces. She looked at Oliver with something approaching wonder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing us." Oliver smiled, a small, sad smile that seemed too mature for his years. "My mom used to bring me here," he said. "She used to say that the Golden Fork was where real people ate real food and had real conversations. I think I finally understand what she meant." He turned back to his father, and in his eyes was not anger, not contempt, but something far more powerful. Disappointment. "I want to go home now," Oliver said quietly. "I'm not hungry anymore." But going home would not be so simple, because what none of them knew yet was that this moment, this single encounter in a modest diner, was about to unravel secrets that would change all of their lives forever. And Marcus Wellington was about to discover that the woman he had just humiliated held the key to a truth he had been running from for over a decade. The silence in the diner stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Marcus Wellington remained frozen in his booth, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His own son, the heir to his empire, had publicly dismantled him with the precision of a surgeon and the honesty of a child who had not yet learned to lie. Oliver stood between his father and the door, his small frame rigid with an emotion that seemed too large for his body. Sarah held Emma close, both of them caught in this unexpected drama that had erupted from a simple trip to get something to eat. "Oliver!" Marcus finally managed, his voice stripped of its usual commanding tone. "Get in the car. We're leaving." "No." The word was simple, final, and utterly shocking. Marcus could not remember the last time anyone had told him no. Certainly not his son, who had always been quiet, compliant, the kind of child who observed rather than confronted. "Excuse me?" Marcus rose from his seat, his height and presence designed to intimidate. It had worked on competitors, on employees, on anyone who had ever stood in his way, but his son did not flinch. "I said no, Dad. Not until you apologize to them." "Apologize?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't apologize. I didn't become who I am by apologizing to everyone whose feelings got hurt. Then maybe who you are isn't someone worth being." The words landed like physical blows. Marcus staggered slightly, reaching for the table to steady himself. Around them, the other diners had stopped pretending not to watch. Dorothy stood near the kitchen door, her hand over her heart. Even Bethany, the young hostess, had tears in her eyes. Sarah stepped forward, still holding Emma. "Please," she said, her voice exhausted. "Please, we don't need an apology. We just want to leave. We don't want any trouble." "You're not trouble," Oliver said, turning to her with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the confrontation he had just initiated. "My dad is the trouble. He's been trouble for a long time, but I was too scared to say anything. I'm not scared anymore." Marcus felt something cracking inside his chest. It wasn't his heart exactly, but something that had been holding his heart in place, keeping it protected from anything that might make it feel too much. He looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. "Oliver," he said, and his voice was different now, smaller. "Why are you doing this?" "Because of Mom." The word fell like a bomb in the silent diner. Marcus's face went pale. "Because every time I see someone struggling," Oliver continued, "I think about how Mom struggled, how you made her struggle, how you took everything from her and then told everyone she was the problem. But she wasn't the problem, Dad. She was never the problem." Sarah had been watching this exchange with growing confusion, but at the mention of Oliver's mother, something flickered across her face. Recognition, memory, something that made her hold Emma even tighter. "Your mother," Sarah whispered almost to herself. Oliver's mother. Oliver turned to look at her, and for a moment their eyes met with an intensity that seemed to transcend the strangeness of their situation. Her name is Grace, Oliver said. Grace Wellington. Well, she doesn't use Wellington anymore. She went back to her original name after the divorce. Sarah's face went completely white. Her arms loosened around Emma, and she had to set her daughter down before her legs gave out. She stumbled backward until she hit the booth behind her, sliding down into the seat as if her bones had turned to water. "Grace," she repeated, and now there were tears streaming down her face. "Grace Campbell?" It was Marcus's turn to go pale. "How do you know that name?" Sarah looked up at him, and in her eyes was something that transformed the entire situation. Not anger, not fear, but a devastation so profound that it seemed to age her years in seconds. "Because Grace Campbell is my sister." The words detonated in the diner like a silent explosion. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a glass of water that shattered on the floor. Oliver's mouth fell open. Emma looked between all the adults, confused by emotions she couldn't understand. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "Grace doesn't have a sister. She told me she was an only child. She told me her parents died when she was young. She told me—" "She told you what you wanted to hear," Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength even as tears continued to fall. "Because you never would have married her if you knew the truth. You never would have touched her if you knew she came from people like me." The pieces began to fall into place in Marcus's mind, each one more devastating than the last. Grace's reluctance to talk about her past, her nervousness whenever he suggested meeting her family, the way she had always seemed to be hiding something, even in their most intimate moments. "I don't understand," Oliver said, his voice small and confused. "Mom has a sister? I have an aunt?" Sarah looked at the boy, at her nephew whom she had never been allowed to know, and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You have an aunt," she confirmed, "and a cousin. Emma is your cousin, Oliver. We're family." Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, what does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said, pulling her daughter close, "that this boy, Oliver, is like your brother. We're connected. We've always been connected, even though we didn't know it." Marcus had collapsed back into his booth, his head in his hands. The man who had controlled boardrooms, manipulated markets, and bent the world to his will, now looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Why?" he managed. "Why did Grace lie to me?" Sarah laughed, but it was a sound without joy, hollow and bitter. "You want to know why? Look at what you just did to me. Look at how you treated me before you knew who I was. Grace knew exactly what kind of man you were. She knew that if you discovered she had a sister who cleaned houses for a living, a sister who lived paycheck to paycheck, a sister who came from the same poverty she had escaped, you would have thrown her away like garbage." "That's not true," Marcus protested weakly. "It's completely true, and you know it. Grace was brilliant, beautiful, ambitious, but she came from nothing, just like me. Our parents did the best they could, but they worked themselves to death just to keep us fed. When Grace got that scholarship, when she clawed her way into your world, she knew she had to hide where she came from. She knew men like you would never accept her if they knew the truth. So she lied about everything?" "She survived," Sarah corrected fiercely. "She did what she had to do to survive in a world that wasn't built for people like us. And for a while, it worked. She had you fooled. She had everyone fooled. But then," Sarah's voice broke, and she had to take several breaths before continuing. "But then I needed help. My husband had just died in an accident, and I had Emma to take care of, and I had nothing. Nothing. So I reached out to Grace for the first time in years. I begged her to help me, and she wanted to. She was going to give me money, going to set me up somewhere, going to take care of her sister like she always promised she would. But I found out," Marcus said, the memory surfacing like a corpse from dark water. "I found the bank transfers. I found the messages. I thought she was having an affair." "You thought she was cheating on you because she was sending money to her own sister," Sarah confirmed, her voice dripping with incredulity. "You, with all your resources, with all your investigators and lawyers, and you never bothered to find out who she was actually sending money to. You just assumed the worst and destroyed her." "The divorce," Marcus whispered. "I accused her of infidelity. I dragged her through court. I took everything. I took Oliver." "You took everything," Sarah agreed, And Grace, my beautiful, brilliant, broken sister, lost the will to fight. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She ended up in a hospital for people who can't take care of themselves anymore. That's where she's been for the past few years, Marcus. That's what you did to her." Oliver had been listening to all of this with growing horror. "Mom is in a hospital? You told me she was traveling for work. You told me she was getting better somewhere warm. You told me—" "I lied," Marcus said, and the admission seemed to physically pain him. "I lied to protect you." "No," Oliver shot back, his voice cracking. "You lied to protect yourself. You always lie to protect yourself. That's all you ever do." The boy turned and ran toward the door, slamming through it into the parking lot beyond. Marcus rose to follow, but Sarah caught his arm. "Let him go," she said. "Give him a minute. That's more than you've ever given anyone." Marcus stopped, looking down at the woman whose hand gripped his arm. The woman he had humiliated minutes ago, who had turned out to be his son's aunt, his ex-wife's sister, a connection he had never known existed. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice was the voice of a man whose entire reality had just collapsed. "I swear to you, I didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" Sarah asked quietly. "Would it have changed anything? Would you have treated me differently if you had known I was Grace's sister before you made your little speech about personal responsibility and bad decisions?" Marcus opened his mouth to say yes. Of course it would have mattered. But the words died in his throat, because he knew, with a certainty that sickened him, that it wouldn't have. He would have found another reason to look down on her. He would have found another way to feel superior. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I want to say yes, but I don't think I can lie anymore. Not today. Not after this." Sarah released his arm and stepped back, looking at him with eyes that held too much pain to contain any anger. "My sister loved you," she said. "Despite everything, despite who you are, she loved you. And she loved Oliver more than anything in the world. Losing him destroyed her more than losing you ever could. I want to see her," Marcus said. "I want to see Grace." "Why? So you can ease your conscience? So you can pretend you're not the villain in this story? Because my son deserves to see his mother. Because I was wrong about everything. Because maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to fix some of what I broke." Emma had been watching all of this with wide eyes, understanding only fragments, but sensing that something enormous was shifting in the universe around her. She tugged on her mother's hand. "Mommy, is Aunt Grace going to be okay?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, at this precious child who had never known the aunt who had sent money for her diapers, her formula, her first shoes, who had loved her from a distance while trapped in a marriage to a man who would never have accepted her existence. "I don't know, baby," Sarah answered honestly. "But I think maybe, for the first time in a long time, there's a chance." Outside, Oliver sat on the curb of the parking lot, his head between his knees. The weight of everything he had learned pressed down on him like a physical force. His mother was sick. His father had lied about everything. He had family he had never known existed. And somehow, impossibly, it had all started because he had wanted to visit a diner that his mother used to take him to before everything fell apart. The door of the Golden Fork opened, and he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't look up, assuming it was his father coming to collect him, to take him back to the empty mansion that had never felt like home. But it wasn't Marcus who sat down beside him on the curb. It was Emma, the little girl with the worn shoes and the stuffed rabbit, the cousin he had never known he had, sat down next to him without saying a word. She didn't try to comfort him. She didn't ask questions. She just sat there, her small presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this anymore. After a long moment, she reached out and took his hand. "I always wanted a brother," she said simply. And Oliver Wellington, heir to billions, surrounded by everything money could buy, but starving for everything it couldn't, began to cry. Inside the diner, watching through the window, Marcus Wellington witnessed his son holding hands with a child in worn clothes, two cousins united by a truth that had been buried under years of lies, and something in his carefully guarded heart began, finally, to break open. But what none of them knew yet was that this was only the beginning, because the hospital where Grace Wellington had spent the last few years was about to receive a visitor, and the secrets she had been keeping went far deeper than anyone could have imagined, including a truth about Emma's father that would change everything once again. The drive to Riverside Haven Psychiatric Center took nearly 2 hours, but inside the car, time had lost all meaning. Marcus sat behind the wheel of his luxury vehicle, but the man driving was not the same man who had walked into the Golden Fork Diner just hours earlier. That man had been certain of everything. This man was certain of nothing. In the back seat, Oliver sat next to Emma, their hands still intertwined as if letting go would mean losing something precious they had only just discovered. Sarah sat on Emma's other side, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape but seeing nothing. She was preparing herself for something she had both longed for and dreaded for years, seeing her sister again. How long has she been there? Oliver finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. A few years. After the divorce, she had what the doctors called a complete breakdown. I thought it was better if you didn't. If I didn't know my mother was suffering, Oliver's voice cracked. If I didn't know she was alone in some hospital while I lived in a mansion with everything except what I actually needed. Marcus had no response. Every word his son spoke was a knife, and he had no defense against any of them. She's not alone, Sarah said quietly. I visit her every week. Every single week, no matter what. Even when I couldn't afford the bus fare, I walked. Even when Emma was sick and I had to carry her with me. Grace has never been alone. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he had been building his empire, attending galas and pretending his ex-wife didn't exist, her sister had been walking miles to visit her. A woman who couldn't afford a meal at a diner had been providing the one thing his billions couldn't buy. Presence. She talks about Oliver, Sarah continued, her voice soft with memory. Every visit, she asks about him. She has a box of newspaper clippings, anything she could find that mentioned the Wellington family. She cuts out any picture that might have Oliver in it. She has dozens of them, Marcus. Dozens of pictures of a son she's not allowed to see. Oliver made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a gasp. She remembers me? She never forgot you for a single moment. You're the first thing she talks about when I arrive, and the last thing she mentions when I leave. You're not just her son, Oliver. You're her reason for holding on. The gates of Riverside Haven appeared through the windshield, an elegant but unmistakably clinical facility surrounded by manicured gardens and high fences designed to look decorative but serving a more practical purpose. Marcus pulled into the visitor parking lot and turned off the engine, but nobody moved to exit the vehicle. What do I say to her? Oliver asked, his voice small and scared in a way that broke something in everyone who heard it. What do you say to someone you love who you abandoned? You didn't abandon her, Sarah said firmly, reaching across Emma to touch Oliver's shoulder. You were a child. You believed what you were told. None of this is your fault. She's right, Marcus said, and the words seemed to cost him everything. None of this is Oliver's fault. It's mine. All of it. Every single moment of pain in this situation traces back to decisions I made. It was the first time Marcus Wellington had ever fully accepted responsibility for anything that didn't result in profit. The admission hung in the air, inadequate but necessary. They exited the car and walked toward the main entrance. The building was designed to look more like a resort than a psychiatric facility, but no amount of architectural softening could disguise what it was. A place for people whose minds had broken under weights too heavy to carry. At the reception desk, a kind-faced nurse named Patricia greeted them. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized Marcus Wellington from countless magazine covers and news articles, but her professionalism quickly reasserted itself. We're here to see Grace Campbell, Sarah said, using her sister's maiden name. Of course. Sarah, it's good to see you. And you've brought guests today. Patricia's eyes moved to Oliver, and something shifted in her expression. Is this... Her son, Sarah confirmed. Oliver, he's finally here. Patricia's eyes glistened. She's going to... Oh my, let me call Dr. Henderson. He'll want to be present for this. Please, wait in the family room. I'll bring you to her shortly. The family room was comfortable but sterile in that way that all institutional spaces managed to be despite their best efforts. Oliver sat on the edge of a couch, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Emma climbed up next to him, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. Is Aunt Grace scary? Emma whispered. No, baby, Sarah answered, kneeling in front of her daughter. Aunt Grace is just very sad. Her heart got so broken that her mind needed time to heal. But she's not scary. She's the kindest person I've ever known. A tall man in a white coat entered the room, his expression professional, but warm. I'm Dr. Henderson. I've been treating Grace for the past few years. He looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Wellington, I've read your name in Grace's file many times, but I never expected to meet you in person. I should have come sooner, Marcus said, and the words sounded foreign coming from his mouth. I should have done a lot of things differently. Yes, Dr. Henderson agreed without softening the truth. You should have, but you're here now and that matters. However, I need to prepare you. Grace has made significant progress in recent months, but she's still fragile. The shock of seeing Oliver after all this time could be overwhelming. We need to approach this carefully. What do we do? Oliver asked. Let Sarah go in first. Let her prepare Grace. Then we'll bring you in slowly. And Mr. Wellington, the doctor turned to Marcus with an expression that was not quite hostile, but certainly not friendly. You should probably stay back initially. Your presence might trigger a negative response. Marcus nodded, accepting the judgment he deserved. Sarah walked down the hallway toward her sister's room, each step carrying the weight of years of watching someone she loved disappear piece by piece. She paused at the door, took a breath, and entered. Grace Campbell sat by the window, her once vibrant hair now streaked with premature gray, her frame thinner than it should be. But when she turned at the sound of the door, her eyes still held that spark of intelligence and warmth that had always defined her. She was a butterfly that had been broken, but somehow, impossibly, she was still beautiful. Sarah, Grace smiled, and for a moment she looked almost like herself again. It's not your usual day. Is everything okay? Is Emma all right? Emma's fine. She's here, actually. But Grace, I need to tell you something. I need you to prepare yourself. Grace's smile faltered. What is it? What's wrong? Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside her sister's chair, taking her thin hands in her own. Nothing's wrong. Something's right. For the first time in so long, something is finally right. I don't understand. Oliver is here, Grace. He's here, in this building, waiting to see you. The words took a moment to penetrate. Then Grace's face underwent a transformation that was painful to witness. Hope and fear and longing and disbelief all fought for dominance, creating an expression that was somehow all of them, and none of them at once. Oliver. Her voice was barely a whisper. My Oliver. My baby. He knows everything. He knows the truth about why you did what you did. He knows about me, about Emma, and he wants to see you. He's been wanting to see you, Grace. He just didn't know where you were. Grace began to shake, tremors running through her entire body. I'm not. Look at me, Sarah. Look at what I've become. I can't let him see me like this. He'll be ashamed. He'll hate me. That boy could never hate you, Sarah said firmly. He defended a complete stranger in a restaurant today because she reminded him of you. He stood up to his father, told him he was wrong about everything because he finally understood what you went through. That boy loves you, Grace. He's always loved you. Marcus, Grace whispered, fear flickering in her eyes. Where is Marcus? He's here too, but he's waiting. He won't come near you unless you want him to. Why is he here? Why now, after all this time? Sarah squeezed her sister's hands. Because Oliver made him face the truth. Because everything Marcus believed about himself got shattered today in a diner, of all places. Because sometimes the universe has a way of bringing things together when the time is finally right. Grace closed her eyes, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. I've dreamed of this. Every night, I dream of Oliver walking through that door. And every morning, I wake up and he's not there. How do I know this isn't another dream? Because I'm here, a voice said from the doorway. Oliver stood at the threshold, unable to wait any longer, unable to stay away from his mother for another second. His young face was streaked with tears, his whole body trembling, but his eyes were fixed on the woman by the window with an intensity that transcended everything else. Mom, he said, and the word contained entire universes of longing. Grace rose from her chair so quickly that she nearly fell. Sarah caught her, steadied her, but Grace's eyes never left her son. Oliver, my beautiful boy. He ran to her then, crossing the room in 3 strides and throwing himself into her arms with the abandon of a child who had been waiting his whole life for this moment. She caught him, held him, pulled him so close that it seemed she was trying to absorb him back into herself. "I'm sorry," Oliver sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry I didn't come. I'm so sorry I believed him. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." "No," Grace whispered fiercely, her hands running through his hair, memorizing the feel of him. "No, my darling. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You were a child. You are a child. None of this was ever your fault. I missed you so much. Every day. Every single day I missed you. I missed you too, baby. More than you could ever know. More than words could ever say." They held each other for what seemed like hours, mother and son reunited after years of enforced separation. Sarah watched from the side of the room, tears flowing freely down her face. Emma had appeared in the doorway, and she too was crying, though she didn't fully understand why. When they finally separated enough to look at each other, Grace cupped Oliver's face in her hands, studying every feature as if she were seeing a miracle. "You've grown so much," she breathed. "You're so handsome. You look like—" She stopped, the words dying in her throat. "I look like Dad," Oliver finished quietly. "I know, but I don't want to be like him, Mom. I don't want to be anything like him." "You're not," Grace said firmly. "You're nothing like him. You're kind. I can see it in your eyes. You have a good heart, Oliver. You always did." "He's here," Oliver said. "Dad is here. He wants to see you, but only if you want to see him." Grace's expression flickered, old wounds opening at the mention of his name. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," Sarah interjected. "You don't owe him anything, Grace. Not a single thing." But something shifted in Grace's eyes, a resolution forming, a strength gathering from somewhere deep within her broken spirit. "No," she said slowly. "I think I need to see him. I think I need to finally say the things I never got to say." Sarah went to retrieve Marcus while Grace and Oliver sat together on the small sofa in her room. Emma had crawled up next to them, finally meeting the aunt she had only heard about in whispered stories. Grace looked at the little girl with the worn clothes and the love-to-pieces rabbit, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She looks just like you did," Grace said to Sarah when her sister returned. "When we were little. Before everything. She looks exactly like you." "She has your spirit," Sarah replied. "Fierce and brave and unafraid to stand up for what's right." Marcus appeared in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than the man who had terrorized boardrooms and dominated industries. He looked, for the first time in decades, uncertain. "Grace," he said, and her name sounded like both a prayer and an apology. Grace looked at him, at this man who had once been her everything and then became her destruction. She looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady in a way it hadn't been in years. "You took everything from me, Marcus. My son, my dignity, my sanity. You took everything because you couldn't stand the thought that I came from somewhere you considered beneath you." "I know," Marcus whispered. "I know what I did." "Do you? Do you really understand? Because I need you to understand something, Marcus. I need you to understand that I loved you. Despite everything, I loved you. And that love nearly destroyed me. I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, and everyone in the room knew it. "I'm so sorry, Grace. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I lost with my son. Sorry doesn't heal the damage you did to my mind and my heart. Sorry is just a word, Marcus. It means nothing without action." "Then tell me what to do," Marcus said, and his voice broke in a way that seemed to surprise even him. "Tell me how to make this right." "I'll do anything." "Anything." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then at Oliver, then at Sarah and Emma. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that silenced everyone. "There's something you need to know first. Something I've kept secret even from Sarah. Something about Emma's father." Sarah's head snapped toward her sister. "What about Michael? He died in an accident. That's what you told me." "That's what I told everyone," Grace said quietly. "Because the truth was too dangerous. Because I was trying to protect you." "Grace," Sarah's voice trembled. "What are you saying?" Grace took a shaky breath, and when she spoke, her words detonated in the room like a bomb. "Michael didn't die in an accident. Michael is alive, and he's been working for Marcus for the past several years." The words hung in the air like poison, infecting everyone who breathed them in. Sarah stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what her sister had just said. Michael. Her Michael. The man she had mourned for years. The man whose death had shattered her world and left her counting coins in diners just to survive. Alive. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. "I identified his body. I buried him. I watched them lower his coffin into the ground. I visit his grave, Grace. I bring flowers. Emma talks to his headstone. The body you identified had been in the water for days," Grace said, each word clearly causing her pain. The face was damaged. "They told you it was Michael based on his identification, his clothes, his wedding ring. But it wasn't him, Sarah. It was someone else." "Who? Who would do that? Why would anyone do that?" Grace's eyes moved to Marcus, who had gone completely pale. "Tell her, Marcus. Tell her what you did." Every person in the room turned to look at the billionaire, who seemed to be shrinking under the weight of their stares. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. "I didn't know," he started. "I swear I didn't know he was your husband. I didn't know anything about you until today." "But you knew Michael," Grace pressed. "You knew him, and you helped him disappear." "He came to me," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Years ago. He said he was in trouble. He said there were people after him, dangerous people. He owed money to the wrong kind of men. He said they would hurt his family if they found him, that the only way to keep his wife and daughter safe was to make everyone believe he was dead." Sarah's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, her entire body shaking with the force of revelation. "He chose to leave us. He chose to let us think he was dead. He chose to let Emma grow up without a father. He said it was to protect you," Marcus continued, though his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "He said if they thought he was dead, they would stop looking. They would leave you alone. And you believed him? You helped him? He was useful to me. He had skills I needed. I gave him a new identity, a new life, a job in one of my companies overseas. In exchange, he worked for me. I thought I was helping him. I thought I was doing something good." "Good?" Sarah's voice rose to a scream that echoed off the walls. "You call this good? My daughter cries herself to sleep asking why her daddy had to die. I work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table because I have no one to help me." "I thought I was a widow, Marcus. I grieved. I mourned. I died inside a little more every single day. And all that time, he was alive, working for you, building a new life while we struggled to survive." Emma had started crying, confused and frightened by her mother's anguish. Oliver pulled his cousin close, shielding her from the chaos erupting around them. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. "Where is Michael right now?" Marcus hesitated. He's here, in the city. He's been running one of my local operations for the past several months. You brought him back here, to the same city where his daughter lives, where I live? I didn't know you were here. I didn't know about the connection. I just needed someone I trusted in that position, and Michael had proven himself reliable over the years." Sarah laughed, but it was a terrible sound, devoid of any humor. "Reliable. He abandoned his family and you call him reliable. What kind of monsters are you people?" Grace reached out and took her sister's hand. "I found out by accident. Months ago, I saw a photograph in a magazine, some business article about Wellington Technologies expanding. Michael was in the background. I recognized him immediately. I started to investigate, asked questions, made calls. That's when Marcus's lawyers got involved. They offered me money to stay quiet. A lot of money. You took money to keep this secret from me?" "No," Grace said firmly. "I refused. I told them I was going to tell you everything. And then suddenly my treatment here changed. My medication was adjusted. I became foggy, confused. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't think clearly enough to contact you." All eyes turned to Marcus, whose face had gone from pale to ashen gray. "I didn't order that," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't order anyone to change her medication. But someone did." Dr. Henderson spoke from the doorway, his expression grave. "I've been reviewing Grace's file since this conversation began. There were unauthorized changes to her treatment protocol several months ago. Changes that came with documentation I now suspect was forged. Someone wanted to keep Grace quiet, and they used our facility to do it." "Michael," Sarah breathed. "Michael did this. He found out Grace knew. and he silenced her. "We don't know that for certain," the doctor cautioned. "I do," Grace said, "because he visited me. Once, late at night. He told me that if I said anything, if I ruined the life he had built, he would make sure Sarah and Emma suffered. He said he had protected them by leaving, and he would protect himself by any means necessary." The room fell silent as the full horror of the situation became clear. Michael wasn't just a man who had made a desperate choice to protect his family. He was a man who had chosen his own survival over everyone who had ever loved him and was willing to hurt them to maintain his deception. "I want to see him," Sarah said, her voice suddenly cold and hard. "I want to look him in the eyes and ask him why. Why he let our daughter grow up believing her father was dead. Why he chose to abandon us instead of fighting for us." "Sarah, that might not be safe, Doctor," Henderson warned. "I don't care about safe anymore. I've spent years being safe. I've spent years being quiet and careful and struggling alone. I'm done. I want answers. I deserve answers. Emma deserves answers." Oliver spoke up, his young voice cutting through the tension. "I'll go with you. We'll all go together. He can't hurt all of us." Marcus straightened, something shifting in his posture. "Oliver is right. This ends today. I've spent my entire life thinking only about myself, about my success, about my image. I helped create this situation because I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I owe it to all of you to make this right." "You can't make this right," Sarah said bitterly. "Maybe not, but I can try. I can start." He pulled out his phone. "Michael is at the downtown office right now. I'm going to call him and tell him to stay there. We're going to confront him together, and we're going to get the truth." An hour later, they stood in the lobby of Wellington Technologies' downtown headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that represented everything Marcus had built and everything he was now questioning. Grace had insisted on coming despite Dr. Henderson's concerns, supported by her sister on one side and her son on the other. Emma held Oliver's hand, still not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing its importance. The elevator rose through 40 floors of corporate power, each level a testament to Marcus's success, and he now realized his willful blindness to the cost of that success. The doors opened onto an executive floor where a man stood waiting, his back to them as he looked out the window at the city below. "Marcus," the man said without turning around, "your message was cryptic. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" "Turn around, Michael." Something in Marcus's voice made the man freeze. Slowly, he turned, and Sarah saw her husband's face for the first time in years. He looked different, older, more polished. The rough edges that she had loved had been smoothed away, replaced by the sleek exterior of a corporate executive. But his eyes were the same, and when they landed on Sarah, something flickered in them. Fear, perhaps. Or maybe just the inconvenience of being caught. Sarah. Her name in his mouth sounded wrong, like a word he had forgotten how to pronounce. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Sarah stepped forward, years of grief and anger propelling her. "What am I doing here? I'm here because I just found out my dead husband isn't dead. I'm here because my daughter has been crying over a grave that's empty. I'm here because you destroyed our lives and then walked away to build a new one." Michael's eyes darted to Marcus, looking for support, but found none. Then to Grace, and his expression hardened. "I see my concerns about her were justified. She couldn't keep her mouth shut." "Don't you dare," Sarah hissed. "Don't you dare act like she's the problem here. You drugged her, Michael. You had her medication changed to keep her quiet." "I did what I had to do to survive." "Survive? You were surviving just fine in your fancy job with your new life while your daughter went hungry. While I counted coins to buy her a meal. While she grew up believing her father was dead because he was too much of a coward to face his problems." "You don't understand," Michael said, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his polished exterior. "The men I owed money to, they weren't the kind of people you negotiate with. They would have killed me. They would have killed all of us. Then you should have gone to the police. You should have asked for help. You should have done anything except abandon your family. The police couldn't have protected us. No one could have. Disappearing was the only option." "And staying disappeared? Working for Marcus for years while we struggled? Was that the only option too?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I sent money, anonymous donations. I made sure you had enough to survive." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Enough to survive? Michael, we barely survived. Your anonymous donations, if they even existed, weren't enough to pay rent and buy food and keep Emma in clothes that fit. Do you know what I've been doing to keep us afloat? Do you have any idea what your protection actually cost us? I did the best I could. No, a small voice interrupted. You didn't. Everyone turned to look at Emma, who had released Oliver's hand and stepped forward. Her worn shoes looked even more worn against the polished floor of the executive office. Her patched clothes stood in stark contrast to the wealth surrounding her, but her eyes, her mother's eyes, held a fire that made her seem 10 feet tall. My mommy works all the time, Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears rolling down her cheeks. She doesn't sleep, so she can take care of me. She gives me her food when there isn't enough. She walks in the rain, so she can save money for my school supplies. She's the bravest, strongest, best person in the whole world. And you're just a man who ran away. Michael stared at his daughter, this child he had watched from a distance for years, never approaching, never revealing himself. For a moment, something human flickered in his eyes, something that might have been regret. Emma, he said softly. Don't say you're sorry, Emma interrupted. Sorry is just a word. Mommy taught me that. Words don't mean anything if you don't do something to make it better. The room fell silent. A child had just summarized the entire moral failure of a grown man in 2 sentences. Marcus stepped forward. Michael, your employment with Wellington Technologies is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. But before you go, you're going to sign documents acknowledging your legal and financial obligations to Sarah and Emma. You're going to transfer every penny you've saved while working for me to an account in Sarah's name. And you're going to explain to a family court judge why you should be allowed anywhere near your daughter ever again. You can't do this, Michael sputtered. I know things about your operations. I know secrets that could destroy you. Then destroy me, Marcus said calmly. I deserve to be destroyed. But it won't change what you owe your family. And it won't change the fact that everything you built on their suffering ends today. Michael looked around the room, searching for an ally and finding none. His polished exterior finally cracked completely, revealing the desperate, selfish man underneath. Fine, he spat. Take it all. I don't care anymore. I've been carrying the weight of this secret for years. I'm tired of pretending, tired of hiding. You want the truth? Here's the truth. I never wanted to be a father. I never wanted the responsibility. When those men came after me, part of me was relieved. It was an excuse to leave, to start over, to be free. Sarah recoiled as if struck. You never wanted us? I wanted the idea of you, the picture-perfect family, but the reality was harder than I expected. So when the opportunity came to disappear, I took it, and I've never regretted it. Not once. The cruelty of his words hung in the air, poisoning everything they touched. But strangely, Sarah felt something release in her chest. The grief she had carried for years had been grief for a man who had never truly existed. The man standing before her now was a stranger, and strangers didn't deserve her tears. Thank you, she said quietly. Michael blinked. What? Thank you for finally telling the truth. Thank you for showing me that I haven't lost anything. Because you were never really mine to lose. You were never really Emma's father. You were just someone passing through our lives, and now you're passing out of them forever. She turned to her daughter and knelt down, taking Emma's small hands in her own. Baby, I'm sorry you had to hear all that. I'm sorry this is how you're meeting your father. But I want you to know something important. We don't need him. We never needed him. We have each other, and now we have family we didn't even know about. We have your Aunt Grace and your cousin Oliver. We're not alone anymore. Emma looked at her mother, then at the man who had just admitted he never wanted her, then back at her mother. Can we go home now, Mommy? I don't want to be here anymore. Yes, baby. We can go home. As Sarah lifted Emma into her arms and turned to leave, Marcus spoke one last time. Sarah, wait. She turned, expecting another justification, another explanation. Instead, Marcus Wellington did something no one in that room had ever seen him do. He knelt. Right there, on the polished floor of his executive office, the billionaire knelt before the woman he had humiliated in a diner just hours earlier. I have spent my entire life looking down on people. I have judged worth by wealth and measured success by power. Today, I watched a little girl with nothing teach me more about courage than I've learned in 50 years. I watched a woman who couldn't afford a meal demonstrate more dignity than I've ever possessed. And I watched my own son show me what it truly means to be a man. His voice cracked, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to cry. I cannot fix what Michael did. I cannot give you back the years you lost. But I can give you something else. I can give you the resources to build whatever life you want. I can make sure Emma has every opportunity she deserves. And I can spend whatever time I have left trying to be the kind of man my son believes I could be. Sarah looked down at this broken billionaire and saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine transformation. Not the performance of remorse, but the real thing, messy and imperfect and raw. "Stand up, Marcus," she said finally. "You don't have to kneel to me. You just have to change." "I will," he promised. "I swear to you I will." As they left the building together, Sarah, Emma, Grace, Oliver, and Marcus, they looked like the strangest family anyone had ever seen. Broken in different ways, wounded by different hands, but somehow, impossibly, beginning to heal. Behind them, Michael stood alone in his empty office, finally free of the family he had never wanted. He had gotten exactly what he wished for, and it was the worst punishment anyone could have given him. Time has a way of healing wounds that once seemed fatal. It doesn't erase the scars, but it teaches us to carry them differently, to transform them from marks of pain into maps of survival. Months had passed since that afternoon at Wellington Technologies, when a family had been torn apart and rebuilt in the same breath. Months of therapy sessions and legal proceedings. Months of difficult conversations and harder silences. Months of learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that broken things could become whole. On a crisp autumn morning, a car pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Haven Psychiatric Center for what would be the last time. But this wasn't a visit. This was a homecoming in reverse. Grace Campbell stood at the entrance of the facility that had been her home for years, a small suitcase in one hand and a folder of discharge papers in the other. She looked different now. Her hair had been cut shorter, framing a face that had regained its color and vitality. Her eyes, once clouded with medication and despair, now sparkled with something that had been missing for far too long: hope. "Ready?" Sarah asked, standing beside her sister with tears already forming. "I've been ready for years," Grace replied. "I just didn't know it until now." Oliver rushed forward and wrapped his arms around his mother, a ritual that had become familiar over the months of regular visits. But this hug was different. This hug meant she was coming home. "I cleaned your room 3 times, Oliver said into her shoulder. "And I put fresh flowers on the nightstand, the purple ones you like." "Lilacs," Grace smiled, running her fingers through her son's hair. "You remembered." "I remember everything now, Mom. Everything." Emma tugged on Grace's sleeve, looking up with those eyes that had already seen too much but still managed to sparkle with childlike wonder. "Aunt Grace, are you going to live with us forever now?" Grace knelt down to meet her niece at eye level. "Forever is a very long time, sweetheart. But I'm going to be close by, very close, and I'm never going to disappear again. I promise." Marcus stood a few steps back, watching the scene with an expression that those who had known him before would never have recognized. The arrogance that had once defined his every movement was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that looked remarkably like humility. Over the past months, he had kept every promise he had made on that day in his office. He had established the Campbell Wellington Foundation, dedicated to helping families in financial crisis avoid the kind of desperate situations that had torn so many lives apart. He had personally overseen the creation of the Grace Initiative, a program that provided mental health resources to those who couldn't afford them. And he had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company to focus on something he had neglected for far too long: being a father. "Marcus," Grace said, straightening up and facing her ex-husband. The word no longer carried the venom it once had. Time and therapy had taught her that holding on to hatred was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. "Grace," he nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "You look wonderful. I feel wonderful. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. I'm glad. Truly." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with all the things that could never be unsaid, all the damage that could never be fully repaired. But there was also something else in that silence: acceptance. The recognition that some relationships couldn't be restored to what they were, but could perhaps become something new. "Thank you," Grace said finally, "for the foundation, for the initiative, for everything you've done for Sarah and Emma. You didn't have to do any of it." "Yes, I did. I had to. Not because anyone forced me, but because I finally understood what my son tried to teach me that day in the diner. Character isn't what you do when everyone is watching. It's what you do when you think no one will ever know. Oliver taught you that? Oliver taught me everything that matters. I just wish I had been willing to learn sooner." Dr. Henderson appeared at the entrance, his professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. He had watched Grace's transformation over the past months, had seen her climb out of the darkness one painful step at a time. Cases like hers were why he had become a doctor in the first place. "Mrs. Campbell," he said, extending his hand, "it has been an honor to be part of your journey. Please don't be a stranger. The door is always open if you need anything. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for never giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." As they walked toward the car, Sarah linked her arm through her sister's, a gesture so natural that it seemed impossible they had ever been separated. "I have a surprise for you," she said. "We're not going straight home." "A surprise?" "Sarah, I don't need any surprises. I just want to be with my family. Trust me. You're going to want this one." The drive took them through streets that Grace hadn't seen in years, past landmarks that triggered memories both painful and precious. When the car finally stopped, Grace looked up at the building before them and felt tears spring to her eyes. The Golden Fork Diner. "Why are we here?" she whispered. "Because this is where everything changed," Oliver said, opening her door. "This is where I started to understand who you really were, and this is where we're going to celebrate who we're becoming." They walked through the doors together, and Grace was immediately transported to a different time. The smell of coffee and fried food, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the worn vinyl booths that had witnessed countless stories of ordinary people living ordinary lives. She had brought Oliver here as a child, trying to show him that there was beauty in simplicity, worth in humility. Dorothy, the waitress who had been working that fateful day months ago, looked up from the counter and broke into a wide smile. "Well, look who's here! The whole family!" Over the past months, the Golden Fork had become a regular destination for this unlikely group. Dorothy had watched them grow from strangers to something that defied easy definition. Not quite a traditional family, but something perhaps more precious. A family forged by choice rather than obligation. "Your usual table is ready," Dorothy said, gesturing toward the booth by the window. "I saved it special." As they settled into their seats, Grace found herself sitting where Sarah had sat on that day. The day when she had been counting coins and wondering how she would feed her daughter. Now, the table was filled with people she loved, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt complete. "I never told you why this place meant so much to me," Grace said, looking at her son. "When Sarah and I were little, our parents used to bring us here every Sunday after church. It was the only restaurant they could afford, but they made it feel special. Mom would let us order whatever we wanted, even if it meant she and Dad would just share a coffee and watch us eat." "They sacrificed for you," Oliver said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They sacrificed everything for us. They worked themselves to exhaustion so we could have a chance at something better. And when I finally got that chance, when I escaped the poverty they had fought so hard to lift us from, I was ashamed of where I came from." Grace's voice cracked. "I spent years trying to be someone I wasn't, hiding my past like it was something dirty. And in the process, I lost everything that actually mattered." Sarah reached across the table and took her sister's hand. "You didn't lose me. You never lost me. I was always here, waiting for you to remember who you really were. I know that now. I know that family isn't something you can buy or hide or pretend away. It's something you carry in your heart, no matter where life takes you." Emma, who had been coloring on a paper placemat, looked up with an expression of profound wisdom that children sometimes possess without knowing it. "Mommy says we're rich now because we have each other. She says that's the only kind of rich that matters." Marcus, who had been listening quietly, felt something shift in his chest. He thought about his mansion, his cars, his empire built on the belief that wealth was the ultimate measure of success. And he looked at this little girl in her simple clothes, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, and realized that she possessed something he had spent 50 years failing to acquire. "Your mommy is very wise," Marcus said softly. "I spent my whole life trying to become rich, and I never understood that I was poor the entire time. Poor in all the ways that actually matter. But you're learning," Oliver said, and there was no accusation in his voice, only hope. "That's what matters, Dad. You're finally learning." Dorothy arrived with their food, plates piled high with burgers and fries and milkshakes, the same meal that had seemed so extravagant when Sarah couldn't afford it. But today, nobody was counting coins. Today there was enough for everyone, and more importantly, there was love to go with it. As they ate, Grace noticed a woman at a nearby table, alone with a young boy, carefully dividing a single meal between them. The woman's clothes were worn, her eyes tired, her movements carrying the weight of struggles that Grace knew all too well. Without a word, Grace stood up and walked to their table. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd like to buy you and your son dinner. Whatever you'd like." The woman looked up with suspicion, born from a life where kindness often came with strings attached. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone should have done it for me years ago. Because your son is looking at you the same way I used to look at my mother, with love and hunger, and the understanding that you're doing everything you can. Because I've been exactly where you are, and I know how heavy that weight can be." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's family taking care of family. We're all family here, even if we don't share the same blood. That's what I've learned. That's what I want to pass on." Grace signaled to Dorothy, who brought menus to the woman's table. Then she returned to her own booth, where everyone was watching with expressions of pride and love. "That was beautiful, Mom," Oliver said. "That was necessary. That's what healing looks like. Not just fixing ourselves, but reaching out to help others who are still broken." Marcus watched the interaction with something awakening in his eyes. "The foundation we started," he said slowly. "We should expand it. Not just financial assistance, but community, connection. A network of people helping people, the way you just did." "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah said. "We could call it the Golden Fork Initiative. This is where everything changed after all." "I like that," Grace smiled. "Mom and Dad would have liked that too." The afternoon stretched into evening, hours passing in conversation and laughter, and the quiet comfort of belonging. Stories were shared, some painful, some joyful, all important. The fabric of their family was being woven in real time, each thread a moment of connection that strengthened the whole. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the diner windows, Emma climbed into Grace's lap with the casual trust of a child who had never known this aunt but loved her anyway. "Aunt Grace?" Emma asked. "What was my daddy like before he became mean?" The table fell silent. It was the question everyone had been avoiding, the wound that still hadn't fully healed. Michael's shadow hung over all of them, a reminder that not every broken thing could be fixed, that some people chose their own darkness. Grace took a deep breath and met Emma's innocent eyes. "Your daddy was scared, Emma. He was so scared of life, of responsibility, of not being good enough, that he ran away from everyone who loved him. That doesn't make what he did right. But it helps us understand that hurt people sometimes hurt other people." "Is he sorry?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But I know this. His choices don't define you. You get to choose who you become. And from what I've seen, you're already becoming someone extraordinary, someone brave and kind and full of love." "Like Mommy?" "Exactly like Mommy." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes and pulled her daughter close. "And like your Aunt Grace, and your cousin Oliver. You come from a long line of survivors, Emma. That's your heritage. That's your strength." Oliver reached across the table and took Emma's small hand in his. "And you have me now. I always wanted a sister, and I got something even better. I got you. Cousins are like siblings you get to choose," Emma declared with the certainty of childhood logic. "That's exactly right," Oliver smiled. "And I choose you. Forever." Marcus cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I want to say something. To all of you." He looked around the table at faces that had once been strangers, that had become his teachers, his conscience, his reason for changing. "I have spent my entire life building an empire, I thought that was my legacy. I thought that was what would matter when I was gone. But sitting here, in this simple diner, surrounded by people who have shown me what courage and love really look like, I realized that I was wrong about everything. He turned to Sarah. You showed me that dignity cannot be measured by bank accounts, that a mother's love is worth more than all the gold in the world. To Emma. You showed me that courage doesn't require size or age, only the willingness to stand up for what's right. To Grace. You showed me that forgiveness is possible, even when it shouldn't be, that the human spirit can survive things that should have destroyed it. And finally, to Oliver. You showed me who I could become, even when I had spent decades proving who I was. You saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and I promised to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your belief. Oliver stood and walked around the table to embrace his father. It was the first time they had truly hugged since that day in the diner, the first time Oliver had allowed himself to believe that change was real. I'm proud of you, Dad, Oliver whispered. Finally, I'm proud to be your son. Those words, simple and profound, broke something in Marcus Wellington that needed to be broken. He held his son and wept, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to cry until this family had taught him to feel again. Dorothy watched from the counter, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. She had seen a lot in her years at the Golden Fork, but she had never seen anything quite like this. A billionaire crying in a diner booth, surrounded by a family that had been strangers months ago, transformed by nothing more powerful than love and truth and the willingness to change. As night fell and the diner began to empty, the unlikely family remained at their table by the window, none of them wanting this moment to end. Outside, the world continued its relentless turning. Problems remained unsolved. Struggles continued. Life, with all its hardships, waited for them beyond those doors. But inside the Golden Fork, in that warm bubble of light and love, something had been completed. A circle had been closed. A family had been forged. Grace held Emma on her lap. Sarah leaned against her sister's shoulder. Oliver sat close to the mother he had been reunited with, and Marcus watched them all, with an expression of gratitude so profound, it transformed his entire face. Same time next week? Dorothy asked as she began clearing their plates. Same time every week, Sarah confirmed. This is our place now. This is where our family meets. Then I'll save the booth, Dorothy smiled. The table by the window, for the family that found each other in the most unexpected way. As they finally rose to leave, Grace paused at the door and looked back at the diner one last time. This simple place, with its worn booths and fluorescent lights and smell of coffee, had witnessed the worst moment of her sister's life and the best moment of her own. Thank you, she whispered to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone, to the universe that had brought them together, to the pain that had taught them compassion, to the child who had started it all by defending her mother's honor with nothing but words and courage. Outside, the autumn air was crisp with possibility. Oliver held one of Grace's hands. Sarah held the other. Emma rode on Marcus's shoulders, laughing at the height, trusting completely that he wouldn't let her fall. They walked into the night as what they had become, a family built not from obligation but from choice, not from blood alone, but from the decision to love each other through all the broken places. And somewhere in the distance, a star appeared in the darkening sky, the first light of evening, shining down on 5 people who had discovered the truth that changes everything, that we are never too broken to heal, that we are never too lost to be found, that we are never too far gone to come home, and that love, real love, the kind that sees us at our worst and stays anyway, is the only wealth that truly matters.